Back now with our panel, and I want to talk to our foreign policy folks on this one. What about Iran? What happens there, David?
Well, you know, Defense Secretary Panetta gave this interview to Scott Pelley in which he said that the Iranians would need 1 year to build a bomb. Now that 1 year starts counting from the moment they make a decision to build the bomb, and he said they have no evidence that Iran has made that decision. But how are we going to know that? That's going to be a decision made, obviously, in great secrecy. So are the U.S. and, more importantly, Israel going to be confident enough in their intelligence, or are they going to decide that they cannot afford to wait any longer, and particularly the Israelis? When they look at Iran and its nuclear program, what they see is Adolf Hitler in 1939. If they don't do something about it, there's going to be another Holocaust.
Liz Palmer, what would you add on to that, because you spent some time in Iran?
I would say that there's a huge power struggle going on inside Iran between the president, Ahmadinejad, and the supreme leader. And whenever the Iranian leadership is consumed with its own power struggle, it tends to act out and do something provocative to draw attention away. Is this the moment they're going to act out by deciding to go after a bomb? It's a highly unstable and dangerous time.
Bob Orr, speaking of unstable, North Korea, the longtime dear leader, has passed, apparently, and gone on to whatever reward he has earned. What do you think what's the situation? What do we know about North Korea?
Well, the problem is we don't know very much at all. We know virtually nothing about the successor, his youngest son, who has a bit of a Western education, but this is a person who's been purposely closeted away from the public. I think the question there is who's really going to run the country. I mean, will it be entrusted to this young successor, or will the military complex there take control? And I think most of the smart people are saying there might be a little bit of a power struggle here, at least a vacuum, an uncertainty that raises everybody's stakes, because this is a flashpoint that's just kind of waiting to happen. And we know in the past that Korea has always used provocation as a way to try to get its way. The question is, will that continue?
Nora, what do they think at the White House is the most dangerous place in the world right now? North Korea, or still the Pakistan border?
Well, I think there are a number of hot spots. On North Korea in particular, one of the problems is there almost is no intelligence in North Korea. It's more difficult, I was told, than getting intelligence in Iran because it is a hermetically sealed place, so there's a concern about loose nukes there. On Iran, you've seen this administration, the president, make the case repeatedly that they believe they've imposed the toughest sanctions ever. If you talk to leaders in the Middle East, they believe there's more unity now around the world against Iran, and so they believe they've done that. But there's still this great concern that Iran could eventually develop a nuclear weapon. But so far, it's just been tough sanctions from this administration.
Nancy Cordes, among the things Congress didn't do, we saw the collapse of the so-called super committee, but we kind of overlooked the fact that the law that created the super committee called for these draconian across-the-board cuts in places, including the Pentagon, at the end of next year. Does anyone really believe Congress will let those cuts go into effect?
Well, I think what we've seen this year is that even when Congress decides it wants to do something, it can't necessarily achieve it. So even if you have some Republicans and some Democrats who want to roll back so-called sequestration and make sure that those cuts aren't imposed, they may not be able to marshal the support they need to actually pass a bill on it. And you've heard the president come out very forcefully and say, look, I am going to stick with this unless you can come up with some other way to cut $1.2 trillion from the budget. This was supposed to be a big stick to force the super committee to act. And, if the super committee couldn't get its act together, then this is what you get.
Anthony Mason in New York, is unemployment going to stay around 9% next year? Is there any suggestion that it might get better?
I think it'll get a little better, Bob. I mean, I think the first half of the year is going to be pretty bumpy, in part because Europe still has not resolved itself. I think the second half of the year you'll start to see some improvement. But I don't think it's going to be all that impressive. I think the president's going to have a tough record to run on. I mean, we might get down to 8.5% unemployment, but that still looks pretty scary, I think, to most people.
And I want to get back to politics a little bit, so everybody join in if you like. How do you see this playing out now, John? Do you think we're going to know early who this Republican nominee is? I'm beginning to think it may be a while, and in fact, you might go down to the convention and not know.
Well, there are a couple of scenarios. It could go a very long while because the actual delegates being selected in the Republican process, we all have been paying a lot of attention to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Florida, but that's only 15%. If you add all that, that's all just 15% of the delegates. So, in fact, it could go on quite a while. The reason it may not is that there are a limited number of candidates who could take it that far. Mitt Romney's one, he's got a lot of money. Rick Perry has a lot of money. But for somebody like Newt Gingrich, he needs to do well and then start to get money, but then he's got to actually go through the process. There are still 20 states before February that you need to get on the ballot. He's got a lot of organizational challenges that because his campaign was considered dead, he can't, he doesn't have things in line. So you could also see a scenario where it ends quickly if Mitt Romney does well because he just doesn't have any more competitors who could make it.
What do they think over at the White House, Nora?
The White House still believes that Mitt Romney will be the eventual nominee, that he's the only one who has the infrastructure to essentially live out this entire process, that it could go long, and they certainly hope that it does so that it drains Mitt Romney's coffers, his cash coffers, as well as sort of his energy, and doesn't allow him to sort of pivot. We saw Mitt Romney try and pivot already to train his fire on the president when he was in New Hampshire, but it's going to be very difficult to do that when he's fighting on his right flank to defeat Newt Gingrich and even Ron Paul in a number of these early primaries.
Does anybody but me remember the days when it was really fun to go to the convention because you didn't know who the candidate was going to be? And I still think there's at least an outside possibility we may say that. Okay, it's time for predictions. Fearless predictions from the CBS correspondents. Liz Palmer, what's your prediction for next year?
One, maybe two civil wars in the Arab world and continuing enormous instability.
All right, Bob Orr.
I think maybe for the first time, cybersecurity catches terrorism, maybe even passes terrorism as our top domestic security concern. And I think we're about due for the first true cyber attack on a piece of critical infrastructure, so we should watch for that, Bob.
Anthony Mason.
I think the economy struggles along, Bob. I think we get a little improvement in the unemployment rate, but not much. Maybe, as I said, 8.5%. Jobs is still the biggest lingering problem in the economy.
David?
If Iran doesn't blink, Israel will strike.
You're saying that Israel will strike Iran?
Go after its nuclear facilities, if Iran doesn't blink.
What will the United States do if that happens, David?
They have no choice but to support Israel. And depending on what the evidence is at that time, they might even want to take part in the raid. It depends on what kind of intelligence they have about that decision that Iran has to make about whether to really build a bomb and go beyond putting all the pieces in place, which is what it's doing now.
Nancy Cordes.
I predict Republicans will gain seats in the Senate, maybe even take control of the Senate. They will lose some seats in the House, but they'll keep their majority. And I think a day of reckoning is coming between House Speaker John Boehner and his number 2 man, Eric Cantor, because they have been on opposite sides of almost every major fight this year. The less charitable view by Boehner's allies is that Cantor keeps cutting him off at the knees, and that has put Republicans in some very sticky positions this year.
Nora.
That's a good prediction. Very interesting to watch that. I think I'm hearing that there have been a lot of really secretive talks going on behind the scenes. The Gang of Six on deficit reduction, they continue to meet regularly. I'm told they're very close to a deal that's $4 to $5 trillion, and that they are working to get new sign-off on that. And I think that's going to be part of the debate again next year, is a significant deficit reduction plan that also includes major tax reform.
John?
I think that we actually are going to see on the super committee that failed to make its $1.2 trillion in cuts. Those automatic cuts are going to happen January 1st, 2013. Nobody wants that to happen. They won't be able to come up with an agreement until after the election. In the lame duck period, when everybody's done with their politicking, there will be a little moment of opportunity there where they actually will come to some kind of a deal, and those ugly cuts, which really hit the Defense Department, or that many people are concerned hit the Defense Department too much, that they'll come up with some kind of agreement.
My prediction, I think we'll see a wholesale turnover in the Congress. I think we'll see more incumbents turned out of office, both Republicans and Democrats, than at any time since I've been here in Washington, and that's been a long time. Well, thanks to all of you. It's a lot of fun to get you together and hear your thoughts.